Are you seriously about to sign this? Emily Carter's voice cut through the cold hum of the boardroom like a lightning strike, making every head turn, every pen pause midair, and every eye fix on the teenager standing in worn sneakers and a faded hoodie, a janitorial badge clipped crookedly to her chest. The fluorescent lights reflected harshly off the polished glass table, illuminating the sharp angles of CEO Andrew Whitman's face, his usually confident smirk faltering as he raised an eyebrow, uncertainty flickering in the depth of his brown eyes. Around the table, the executives shifted uncomfortably, papers rustling, chairs squeaking on the pristine hardwood floors, the silence stretching taut, almost suffocating. Emily held the contract firmly in her hands, scanning the lines of fine print she had meticulously analyzed, each clause memorized and weighed against the potential fallout. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the focused intensity of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment, who understood the stakes not just for the company, but for the people who trusted her to notice what others overlooked. Andrew leaned back slightly, the leather of his chair creaking under the shift, his pen hovering over the document, the weight of decision pressing down on him like the oppressive glare of the overhead lights. This clause, Emily continued, her tone steady yet commanding. It's structured to shift all liability to your company if any merger issues arise. Fraud, defaults, unforeseen disputes, it's a trap. The words hung in the air, heavy and precise, every syllable resonating with authority despite her age and position. Andrew's jaw tightened imperceptibly, and he glanced to his right at his legal counsel, who fidgeted with the edge of a folder, a bead of sweat tracing the line of his temple. The room felt suspended in time, the typical rhythm of boardroom chatter and shuffling papers frozen, replaced by the electric tension of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Emily's gaze swept the table, briefly meeting the startled eyes of each executive before returning to the CEO, unwavering, steady as the minutes stretched, and yet every tick of the wall clock seemed amplified, marking the growing pressure. I've cross-checked every stipulation, she pressed on, voice calm, deliberate, unwavering. If you sign without adjustment, your company assumes the full burden. A soft murmur rippled through the room as the senior partners exchanged worried glances, but Emily did not falter, did not glance away. The sharp scent of polished wood and faint cleaning solution mingled with the subtle aroma of coffee, filling the tense space as Andrew ran a hand down his face. His normally commanding presence diminished under the scrutiny of a teenager who dared to challenge him, who dared to stand so confidently in the glare of authority. Emily's fingers gripped the paper with quiet assurance, and she could feel the subtle shifts, the way the air seemed to thicken, the faint catch of breath from those around, the slight narrowing of Andrew's eyes as comprehension settled in. Every line she had studied, every clause she had anticipated, now demanded recognition. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Andrew felt a prickling unease, the kind that comes when pride meets the unexpected, when experience and authority collide with meticulous preparation and unflinching courage. Emily's presence, quiet yet impossible to ignore, filled the room with a new rhythm, a subtle pulse of determination and integrity. She did not flinch, did not bow. She held the space, claimed it without arrogance, letting the weight of truth and knowledge speak louder than any title or status could. And in that frozen moment, Andrew Whitman realized the room was no longer just a stage for his control, but a place where careful eyes and courageous voices could overturn assumptions, where clarity and precision could unmask oversight, and where a single prepared individual could hold the gaze of power and make it hesitate. The room remained tense, each person frozen, as if even a whisper could shatter the fragile balance. Emily Carter held her papers firmly, her eyes scanning the boardroom with measured precision, noting every subtle movement, every slight shift of posture that betrayed doubt. Andrew Whitman sat rigid, his pen now resting on the edge of the polished oak table, the weight of realization pressing down on him in a way that made the usual confidence he wore like armor feel brittle and hollow. Around him, the senior partners exchanged quick glances, silent communication passing between them, their brows furrowed, lips pressed into thin lines as they processed the implications of Emily's observation. The light overhead cast a pale glow, reflecting off the glass walls and creating a lattice of shadows across the floor, lending the moment a surreal intensity that amplified the quiet tension. Emily's breath was steady, controlled, each inhalation deliberate, and she felt the subtle shift in energy as the executives leaned forward slightly. Curiosity peaked, attention fully captured. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound punctuating the silence, each tick of the wall clock echoing in the collective awareness of the room. Andrew finally reached for the contract, fingers brushing lightly across the smooth surface, his eyes narrowing as he reread the clause she had highlighted, each word now carrying a weight that had previously been invisible. His assistant's hand hovered near a folder, uncertain, as if afraid to break the stillness that Emily had imposed by the clarity of her insight. Emily's gaze flicked toward him briefly, unwavering, and then back to the documents, letting the natural authority of knowledge speak louder than any title could. The tension built incrementally, subtle yet insistent, like the slow tightening of a spring, until Andrew's lips parted slightly, a faint exhale betraying the shift from skepticism to comprehension. Around the room, the board members shifted in their seats, some leaning in closer, others sitting back, all caught in the gravitational pull of the revelation, the realization that the apparently simple clause carried consequences of enormous magnitude. Emily's presence, unassuming yet resolute, commanded attention not by volume, but by the certainty of preparation and understanding, and in that quiet assertion, she established a rhythm that the room could not ignore. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows flickered across the table, bouncing off the edges of documents and laptops, creating fleeting reflections that danced across the polished surface like signals, illuminating the seriousness of what had been nearly overlooked. Andrew's eyes traced the lines of the text, the language now unmistakable in its intent, the carefully buried liabilities fully apparent, and for the first time, the veneer of invulnerability that had defined his demeanor cracked ever so slightly, revealing the human moment beneath. Emily's hands, steady and precise, returned to the papers, flipping each page with deliberate care, a visual assertion that she had fully engaged with the material, that her insight was grounded in diligence and not chance. The room remained still, the usual sounds of shifting papers and quiet coughs absent, replaced by the almost tangible sense of comprehension settling over each person, an unspoken acknowledgement of the knowledge that Emily had brought to light. Andrew's hand lingered over the document, the weight of responsibility evident in the slight tension of his knuckles, and a low murmur of astonishment passed between two of the senior partners, just enough to break the absolute silence, but not enough to diminish the focus on Emily's calm authority. As she straightened slightly, her shoulders squared, the subtle light from the windows catching the edges of her hoodie, it became apparent that the room had recalibrated itself around her, the equilibrium of power momentarily shifting, not through force or position, but through clarity, preparation, and quiet confidence, leaving Andrew Whitman and the entire board in a rare state of pause, contemplation, and reassessment, each heartbeat measured against the gravity of what had just been revealed, the consequence of action and inaction now resting visibly in the balance of the room. Emily Carter took a measured step back from the table, the soft scuff of her sneakers against the polished hardwood echoing faintly in the still air as she allowed the executives a moment to absorb the gravity of her analysis. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught in her dark eyes, reflecting determination and a subtle confidence that belied her age and temporary status, and Andrew Whitman leaned forward slightly, fingertips pressed together, brow furrowed as he reread the contract, tracing the words that had been highlighted with precise attention to detail. The room seemed to hold its breath, the usual sounds of shuffling papers, chair legs scraping, and faint whispers completely absent as each member of the board registered the potential impact of the clause Emily had identified. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, a poised anchor in the storm of consideration, and she observed the small, almost imperceptible shifts, the slight exhale of a senior partner, the tightening of Andrew's jawline, the flicker of doubt crossing the face of the legal counsel who had once been so assured in his reading of the same lines. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the space with a subtle rhythm, emphasizing the stark contrast between the calm of Emily's composure and the sudden disarray of authority figures accustomed to unquestioned control. Andrew's eyes moved systematically across the clause again, scanning each sentence, noting the implications she had outlined, and a quiet recognition settled over him, a realization that despite years of experience, he had been outpaced by meticulous preparation and clarity. Of insight, Emily's posture remained steady, her presence unassuming yet impossible to ignore, a quiet assertion that knowledge and courage could create authority without a title or office. Around her, the light shifted as the sun moved behind a cloud, casting a softer illumination on the reflective surfaces of the room, emphasizing the textures of the polished table, the subtle grains of the wood, and the faint fingerprints on the glass, each detail lending a tangible realism to the moment, grounding the tension in a recognizable space. The assistant's hand lingered near a stack of folders, hesitation evident in the slight tremor, a reflection of the unspoken acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted imperceptibly in the time it took for Emily to deliver her insight. Each member of the board leaned subtly forward, some crossing arms, others resting chins thoughtfully in their hands, all drawn into the gravity of what was revealed, the subtle interplay of competence and authority becoming the focal point of their attention. Emily's eyes swept the room, noting each reaction with quiet acuity, a soft satisfaction mingling with the professionalism she maintained as she considered the impact of what had been revealed, her presence commanding attention not through volume, but through precision and insight. Andrew's shoulders sagged fractionally as he absorbed the implications, the usual weight of certainty replaced by the careful navigation of newfound uncertainty, and the room, though silent, felt charged with potential, the unspoken understanding that one well-prepared voice could alter assumptions, redirect attention, and inspire a reconsideration of established positions. Emily shifted slightly, not out of discomfort, but to maintain balance and poise, the subtle movement drawing the eye and reinforcing the sense of control she exercised without overt dominance, a delicate interplay of presence and observation. The sunlight flickered again, catching the edge of her contract, a glint that seemed almost symbolic of the clarity she had brought to a situation clouded by routine and oversight, and Andrew's eyes followed the shimmer, pausing, registering, processing each implication as it unfolded in real time. Around the room, the collective awareness of the board heightened, each subtle change in expression, each micro-movement registering as a signal of the shift in dynamics, while Emily stood, calm, deliberate, and entirely focused, the living embodiment of preparation, insight, and quiet authority, leaving the room suspended in anticipation of the consequences that would follow and the choices that now lay before the man who had believed himself unchallenged. The air in the boardroom seemed to grow heavier, each subtle shift of light through the tall windows marking the passage of unspoken seconds, and Emily Carter remained poised, her fingers resting lightly on the smooth surface of the polished table, not out of hesitation, but as a deliberate gesture of quiet authority. Andrew Whitman leaned slightly forward in his leather chair, eyes scanning the lines of the contract once more, the creases of concentration etched deeply across his forehead as he began to understand the full magnitude of the oversight, the weight of potential liability pressing on him in a way that no executive briefing or report had ever achieved. Around the room, the senior partners and executives exchanged fleeting glances, the faint shuffle of papers and subtle adjustments of posture punctuating the otherwise still silence, each movement an acknowledgement of the shift in the dynamics of power. Emily's gaze swept across the faces, reading micro-expressions, noting the subtle furrowing of brows, the tightening of lips, the slight narrowing of eyes that betrayed the dawning recognition of her insight. The sunlight caught in the glass panels of the conference room, scattering across the polished oak table in fleeting patterns that highlighted the meticulous organization of the documents before her, each highlighted line a visual testament to preparation and understanding. Andrew exhaled slowly, a deep, measured breath that seemed to draw all the tension from the room into himself, his hands lightly pressing against the surface as he traced the lines she had emphasized, absorbing the clarity she brought, the calm precision that left no room for misinterpretation. Emily shifted slightly, a deliberate movement that subtly asserted her presence without overt display, her shoulders squared, her posture unwavering, conveying both confidence and respect, and the room responded in kind, the collective focus settling fully on the reality she had illuminated. The assistant seated nearest the CEO adjusted a stack of folders with a nervous edge, each paper representing the weight of decisions and potential consequences now reframed by Emily's assessment, while the rest of the board members leaned in, some unconsciously mirroring her composure, their attention fixed entirely on the interplay of clarity and authority at the center of the room. A soft hum from the air conditioning and the distant echo of a passing elevator accentuated the intensity of the moment, the mundane background noises creating a stark contrast to the extraordinary focus and silent tension that had gripped the space. Andrew's eyes lingered over the contract, tracing the lines, reading and rereading, each repetition revealing a nuance previously overlooked, the precision of Emily's preparation transforming a routine review into a moment of revelation, a subtle recalibration of understanding and respect. The light shifted again as the sun moved behind a passing cloud, softening the illumination and casting gentle shadows across the table, lending a natural rhythm to the scene, and emphasizing the contrast between Emily's composed, assured stance and the subtle uncertainty now flickering across the faces of the seasoned executives. Every detail, the polished wood, the scattered notes, the faint reflections on the glass, took on significance as a backdrop to the unfolding recognition that insight and courage could disrupt assumptions and shift perceptions without a word of confrontation, relying solely on preparation, clarity, and quiet confidence. Emily's eyes flicked from the contract to the faces around the room, noting each tiny micro-movement, the subtle changes in posture, the brief hesitation of a hand reaching for a pen, the slight intake of breath that signaled awareness and acknowledgement, and she understood the power of presence and precision, how the calm assertion of truth could recalibrate even the most experienced minds. Andrew's posture adjusted slightly, the initial rigidity giving way to a tentative acknowledgement of the validity of her observation, the weight of leadership now tempered by the recognition that authority did not equate to infallibility, that even seasoned executives could benefit from the insight of careful, deliberate observation, and Emily, standing quietly yet firmly, embodied that principle fully, holding the room in a poised, attentive equilibrium as the sunlight moved across the polished surfaces, marking the subtle passage of this pivotal moment. Emily Carter straightened her shoulders and took a careful step closer to the table, the soft creak of her sneakers against the polished hardwood barely audible in the tense stillness that filled the boardroom. The sunlight filtered through the towering windows, catching the glint of her dark eyes and reflecting off the smooth surface of the contract she held with quiet authority, illuminating each highlighted line as if to emphasize the clarity she had brought to a situation clouded by oversight. Andrew Whitman leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the polished oak, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as his gaze traced the lines Emily had meticulously reviewed, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his broad shoulders in a way that made the usual confidence he carried seem momentarily fragile. Around the room, senior partners exchanged subtle, wordless signals, slight shifts of posture, tightened lips, and raised eyebrows conveying the unspoken acknowledgement that the dynamics of authority had subtly shifted, that a prepared and observant voice had introduced an element of caution into what had been a routine decision. Emily's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, a poised counterbalance to the mounting tension, and she observed the micro-expressions across the room, noting the slight narrowing of eyes, the almost imperceptible deepening of furrows and foreheads, the careful intake of breath as each executive processed the implications of her insight. The soft hum of the air conditioning punctuated the charged silence, every tick of the wall clock resonating, as if emphasizing the slow unfolding of comprehension and recognition. Andrew's eyes lingered over the clause, tracing the carefully structured sentences, the subtle word choices that had been buried in the fine print, and a quiet exhale escaped him, a sign of the dawning realization that despite years of experience and authority, He had overlooked a crucial element that Emily had brought to light with precision and clarity. The room's attention focused entirely on the interaction, the polished surfaces of the table and glass walls reflecting not only the sunlight, but the intensity of the moment, each shadow and reflection reinforcing the tension and the significance of insight over title. Emily shifted subtly, not out of nervousness, but as a deliberate gesture, reinforcing her presence and authority without confrontation, her calm confidence creating a quiet gravitational pull that drew every eye and attention toward her, emphasizing the impact of careful preparation and understanding. Andrew's fingers brushed lightly over the edge of the contract, pausing at the lines she had highlighted, each word now carrying the weight of responsibility, and the room collectively sensed the subtle recalibration of authority, the unspoken acknowledgement that knowledge and diligence could command respect and shift perception even in the presence of power. Emily's gaze moved across the room again, brief yet deliberate, connecting with each executive without words, conveying assurance and the quiet insistence that the clarity she had provided could not be dismissed, that the careful attention to detail and the courage to speak were enough to alter assumptions and redirect attention. The sunlight shifted with the movement of clouds, casting changing patterns across the table and the faces of those seated, a visual echo of the shifting dynamics in the room, and Andrew's posture, once rigid with certainty, softened slightly as the realization of oversight settled fully, marking the subtle but unmistakable transformation from unquestioned authority to considered reflection. Every movement, every glance, every slight breath became part of the rhythm of understanding that Emily had introduced, the room now attuned to the presence of someone whose preparation and focus had demanded recognition, and in that quiet recalibration, the tension held a new resonance, a recognition of insight over position, clarity over assumption, and the potential for careful observation to reshape the expectations and decisions of those who wield power. Emily Carter took a careful breath and let her voice fill the room with a quiet, unwavering clarity, explaining each potential outcome of the clause in measured detail, the sound precise against the muted hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of sunlight glinting off the polished oak table. Andrew Whitman's fingers traced the edge of the contract. Each line she emphasized registering as a ripple of comprehension through his mind, the careful structure of her words cutting through assumptions and routine, reframing the perspective of everyone present. The executives around him leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing, posture taut with concentrated attention, the subtle micro-movements betraying both curiosity and a growing sense of concern, and Emily's steady gaze swept the room, noting the minute shifts in expression that confirmed the gravity of her observations. She highlighted the clauses that transferred responsibility, traced the consequences with careful logic, and illustrated scenarios that could unfold if the contract were signed without adjustment, her hands moving with deliberate precision over the papers, each gesture reinforcing the seriousness of her analysis. Andrew's brow furrowed, and a soft exhale escaped as he absorbed the implications, realizing that the preparation and diligence of a single voice had altered the tempo of the room, changing the implicit power balance without confrontation, relying solely on insight, clarity, and authority of knowledge. The polished surfaces reflected the filtered sunlight and shifting patterns, highlighting the subtle creases in the documents, the slight sheen on Emily's skin from focus and concentration, the tautness in Andrew's shoulders as comprehension settled in, and the overall atmosphere held a quiet electric tension that seemed almost tangible, an invisible pulse of recognition moving through each participant. Emily's posture remained calm, yet assertive, her feet planted firmly, her shoulders squared, her gaze unwavering as she guided the room through the potential outcomes, each scenario delivered with precision and confidence that commanded attention and respect, the silence around her amplifying the impact of every carefully chosen word. The assistant closest to Andrew adjusted a folder hesitantly, a micro-expression of concern briefly flickering before disappearing, and the other board members mirrored subtle responses, a collective recognition of insight over title forming imperceptibly yet unmistakably, the rhythm of their awareness attuning to the meticulous and confident presence of Emily. The hum of the air conditioning, the soft light shifting as clouds moved across the sky, the faint reflections on glass and polished wood all contributed to the weight of the moment, each detail amplifying the sense that a precise, well-prepared voice could shift perceptions, command attention, and guide understanding without force, without authority beyond knowledge. Andrew's hands hovered momentarily above the contract, then lightly pressed against it, his eyes scanning each highlighted line, processing the careful, logical dissection Emily had delivered, and the subtle exhale that followed was a concession to the clarity and rigor she had brought, the calm, yet firm assertion of insight that had captured and redirected the attention of the room. Emily allowed a brief pause, maintaining eye contact with the executives, letting the import of her analysis resonate fully, letting the room absorb the unspoken acknowledgement that preparation, clarity, and courage could exert influence, guiding the perceptions and considerations of those accustomed to unquestioned authority. The sunlight shifted again, casting soft shadows across the table, emphasizing the physical textures of documents and surfaces, drawing attention to the precise alignment of highlighted lines and careful annotations that punctuated her points, a visual reflection of the meticulous reasoning she had presented. Each breath in the room was measured, each shift in posture deliberate, the tension underscored by the quiet authority Emily had established, a moment suspended between revelation and decision, the subtle reorientation of power resting entirely on the clear, unwavering presentation of knowledge and the confidence of a single, prepared individual standing firmly in the room. Andrew Whitman shifted slightly in his chair, the leather creaking softly under the subtle movement, his eyes never leaving the contract as the realization of Emily Carter's insight fully settled in. The room remained almost impossibly still, each executive frozen in a delicate balance of recognition and reassessment, the polished surfaces reflecting the sunlight in scattered patterns that seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. Emily's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers splayed with deliberate precision, her posture unwavering, a quiet anchor in a room that had been momentarily unmoored by clarity and focus. Andrew's brow furrowed, and he ran a hand through his hair, the subtle movements betraying the internal recalibration of authority and the dawning awareness that he had underestimated both the complexity of the clause and the preparation of the person presenting it. Around him, the senior partners shifted imperceptibly, leaning forward or adjusting their seating with micro-expressions of intrigue and acknowledgement, the collective energy of the room pulsing with the unspoken recognition that insight and preparation could command attention without aggression or overt assertion. Emily's gaze moved deliberately from face to face, taking in the nuanced responses, the subtle tightening of lips, the nearly imperceptible raising of eyebrows, the slight nods of silent approval, each micro-expression reinforcing the effectiveness of her calm, confident presentation. The sunlight shifted gradually, casting long, soft shadows across the table and floor, highlighting the meticulous alignment of the documents, the careful highlighting of clauses, and the subtle reflections on glass that added a tangible depth to the intensity of the moment. Andrew's hands hovered briefly over the contract, fingers tracing the words as comprehension deepened, and a low, thoughtful exhale escaped him, a sign of internal recognition that authority did not always equate to infallibility, that preparation and clarity could redefine the dynamics of power in an instant. The assistant nearest to him adjusted a folder slightly, a soft rustle echoing through the otherwise silent room, signaling the subtle acknowledgement that the balance had shifted, that the voice of a well-prepared, confident individual could command focus and respect even in the presence of long-established authority. Emily remained still, not moving to claim any victory, her calm demeanor and precise articulation creating a quiet gravity that drew the attention of every individual present, emphasizing the potency of insight over position and preparation over assumption. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint flicker of sunlight through the high windows created a natural rhythm to the tension, the subtle play of light and shadow mirroring the intricate interplay of authority and recognition unfolding in real time. Andrew exhaled again, slower this time, a deliberate gesture that seemed to acknowledge both the validity of Emily's observation and the need for careful consideration before action, his eyes scanning the document one final time with a new appreciation for precision, patience, and insight. Around the room, the board members' subtle shifts, the gentle lean of a shoulder, the tilt of a head, all reflected an unspoken consensus forming, a recognition that the clarity and preparation Emily displayed warranted attention, respect, and reconsideration. The sunlight continued to move, creating dynamic reflections across the polished surfaces, illuminating her calm focus and reinforcing the silent assertion of competence, as if the environment itself acknowledged the shift. Emily's presence, understated yet undeniably commanding, maintained the balance, allowing the room to process, understand, and adjust to the implications she had revealed, demonstrating that authority could be influenced not through volume or position, but through preparation, clarity, and quiet confidence. The tension held a palpable weight, each subtle movement and micro-expression contributing to the overall cadence of realization, as Andrew Whitman and the executives alike absorbed the implications, reevaluated assumptions, and acknowledged the undeniable impact of a single, meticulously prepared voice in a room accustomed to unquestioned authority. Emily Carter stood perfectly still for a moment, her eyes scanning the room with a calm intensity that drew every executive's gaze like a magnet, the polished surfaces of the boardroom reflecting both sunlight and the subtle tension that had settled over the space. Andrew Whitman's posture had shifted slightly, leaning forward with elbows resting lightly on the table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his face a study in cautious reflection as the reality of Emily's observation sank deeper into his awareness. Around him, the senior partners and legal counsel exchanged subtle signals, slight shifts of shoulders, the faint tightening of lips, and micro-expressions that conveyed unspoken acknowledgement, the silent recognition that insight and preparation could momentarily reshape authority. Emily's hands rested lightly on the contract, her fingers tracing the highlighted clauses with deliberate care, and the quiet precision of her movements reinforced the gravity of her presence, emphasizing the clarity and foresight she had brought to a situation that might have been overlooked. The sunlight shifted subtly as the clouds outside moved across the sky, casting changing reflections across the polished oak and glass surfaces, each flicker drawing attention to the meticulous arrangement of the documents, the deliberate highlighting of crucial sections, and the intensity of Emily's focus. Andrew's eyes scanned the contract again, each word of the clause resonating with implications that stretched far beyond the immediate signing, and his breath, slow and measured, revealed the dawning comprehension that even experience and authority could be tempered by the insight of a prepared, attentive individual. The assistant nearest to him adjusted a stack of folders with a quiet scrape, the sound amplified in the otherwise silent room, and the other executives subtly mirrored these micro-movements, their collective body language a reflection of awareness, contemplation, and reconsideration. Emily's gaze moved deliberately from face to face, noting the nuanced expressions, the slight furrow of a brow, the subtle nods and raised eyebrows, each an unspoken acknowledgement of the validity of her insight and the shift in focus her clarity had imposed. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint interplay of sunlight created a natural rhythm that underscored the tension, highlighting the contrast between her calm, deliberate presence and the careful, thoughtful adjustments of those who had previously been fully confident in their positions. Andrew exhaled again, longer this time, a sound of concession and careful consideration, as he reread the sections she had identified, the deliberate, meticulous presentation of each potential outcome framing the implications in a way that demanded attention and respect. Emily remained poised, her posture squared, her presence measured and deliberate, allowing the subtle power of knowledge, preparation, and courage to permeate the room without the need for overt assertion or confrontation. And in that quiet authority, the executives collectively recognized the shift in perception, the recalibration of consideration, and the emerging respect for the clarity she had brought. The reflections of sunlight shifted again across the polished surfaces, highlighting her calm composure and the precise alignment of highlighted sections, reinforcing the weight of her presence and the effectiveness of preparation and confidence in conveying authority. The tension in the room became almost palpable, a mixture of focus, acknowledgement, and anticipation as each person absorbed the implications of her observations, the subtle adjustments in posture, expression, and gaze signaling the quiet but undeniable recalibration of authority, leaving the room suspended in a moment where insight, clarity, and meticulous preparation held the power to redefine the balance of attention and respect, with Andrew Whitman silently recognizing that understanding and consideration now required him to move beyond assumption and acknowledge the weight of Emily's precise, unwavering perspective. Andrew Whitman finally lifted his gaze from the contract, his eyes tracing the lines once more with deliberate care, and in that quiet motion, a subtle shift passed through the room, a recognition that the initial confidence he had carried into this boardroom was now tempered by awareness and respect. Emily Carter remained poised, her hands lightly resting on the edge of the polished oak table, her dark eyes scanning the executives, noting every micro-expression, every small change in posture, the slight furrow of a brow or tightening of lips, each a signal of comprehension and reassessment. The sunlight continued to filter through the high windows, casting dynamic reflections across the glass and wood, illuminating the meticulously highlighted clauses and reinforcing the gravity of the moment. Around Andrew, the senior partners leaned forward, some crossing arms thoughtfully, others tilting heads with curiosity and consideration, the room collectively acknowledging the weight of Emily's insight without a word needing to be spoken. The soft hum of the air conditioning punctuated the silence, each tick of the wall clock accentuating the slow, deliberate rhythm of recognition and reflection. Andrew's fingers hovered above the contract, brushing lightly across the highlighted sections as if testing their significance, his posture slowly shifting from rigid authority to careful contemplation, the subtle exhale of realization escaping him in measured breaths. Emily's gaze remained unwavering, calm yet commanding, a quiet presence that held the attention of everyone present without force or volume, allowing the authority of preparation, knowledge, and clarity to dominate the room. The assistant near Andrew adjusted a folder lightly, the faint rustle of paper echoing in the still space, signaling the understated acknowledgement of the room's new equilibrium, the subtle recalibration of perception and focus. Each executive responded imperceptibly, slight nods, the soft shift of weight, the careful leaning forward, an unspoken agreement forming around the validity and precision of Emily's observations. The sunlight flickered again as clouds passed overhead, highlighting the crisp lines of the contract, the polished edges of the table, and the attentive expressions of all those present, emphasizing the physical and emotional texture of the moment. Andrew's eyes lingered on the clauses, rereading them slowly, allowing each implication to register fully. The careful reasoning Emily had presented reshaping his understanding of both the contract and the room's dynamic. Emily shifted slightly, not from discomfort, but from deliberate posture, reinforcing her presence, her calm confidence radiating subtle authority that drew every glance, every micro-expression, into alignment with the clarity she had introduced. The room seemed suspended in time, the usual rhythm of activity replaced by a deliberate, measured awareness, each individual attuned to the implications of her insight and the careful analysis she had delivered. Andrew exhaled again, slower this time, a deep and deliberate release, signaling both acknowledgement and the dawning realization that preparation and clarity could recalibrate assumptions, alter perceptions, and command attention even in the presence of long-established authority. The reflections of sunlight shifted across the polished surfaces, drawing attention to Emily's poised demeanor, her precise alignment with the contract, and the subtle tension that now filled the room, a tension balanced between recognition, comprehension, and the quiet power of meticulous preparation. Emily's presence anchored the room, her calm observation and deliberate articulation compelling focus and respect, and in that suspended moment, Andrew Whitman and the executives alike experienced a subtle but undeniable recalibration of perspective, an acknowledgement that insight, clarity, and careful preparation had the power to influence, to guide, and to assert authority in a room accustomed to unquestioned control. Andrew Whitman's eyes widened slightly as he leaned closer to the contract, his fingers tracing the highlighted lines again with meticulous care, each clause now revealing its true weight, the potential liabilities clearly illuminated for the first time. Emily Carter's presence remained calm, yet commanding, her posture straight, her dark eyes steady and focused, conveying quiet authority as she allowed the room to absorb the depth of her insight. Around the table, the executives shifted subtly, some leaning forward, others tilting their heads with intent observation, each micro-movement a reflection of the dawning realization that the previous assumptions had been incomplete, that the careful analysis Emily had provided could not be ignored. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, scattering across polished surfaces, catching the edges of highlighted text, and reflecting briefly in Andrew's thoughtful gaze, emphasizing the meticulous preparation and precision that had guided every point she made. A faint hum from the air conditioning filled the room, punctuating the almost tangible tension, the measured quiet amplifying. Each subtle breath, each small gesture, each micro-expression as awareness settled more fully over the room. Emily's hands rested lightly on the edge of the polished oak table, her fingers brushing the paper in small, deliberate motions as if to anchor the gravity of the moment, and the executives could not help but follow her calm cadence, the rhythm of her presence guiding attention and focus without a single raised voice. Andrew exhaled slowly, a sound that seemed to release both tension and acknowledgement, as he processed the implications of the clause and the clarity Emily had provided, his posture easing from rigid authority to reflective consideration, a subtle concession to the insight she had demonstrated. The assistant seated nearest him adjusted a stack of folders lightly, the sound echoing faintly in the silent room, a signal of recognition that the balance of perspective had shifted and that the thorough preparation Emily had undertaken demanded attention and careful evaluation. Every executive's eyes traced the contract, rereading lines that once seemed routine but now bristled with potential consequences, each subtle shift of comprehension mirrored in their micro-expressions and body language, creating a quiet but unmistakable current of awareness that flowed through the room. The sunlight shifted again, casting moving reflections over the polished table, glass walls, and Emily's composed figure, highlighting the contrast between her confident, deliberate presence and the careful, now considering posture of Andrew Whitman. The room was suspended in a moment of thoughtful tension, each tick of the wall clock underscoring the slow, deliberate consideration of implications, the subtle interplay of insight, authority, and reflection creating a rhythm that everyone present felt and acknowledged. Emily's gaze swept the room once more, catching each small, almost imperceptible gesture, each nod, each shift of eyes, signaling acknowledgement, curiosity, and growing respect for the precision of her reasoning. The polished surfaces of the table and glass reflected the sunlight and the still intensity, reinforcing the focus on the highlighted contract, the careful annotations, and the presence of someone who could assert influence through preparation and knowledge rather than title alone. Andrew's eyes lingered on a specific clause, rereading it slowly, and a subtle change passed over his expression, a combination of surprise, respect, and cautious acknowledgement, as he recognized the necessity of reconsidering the decisions and actions he had been prepared to take before Emily's intervention. Emily remained composed, poised, and deliberate, allowing the authority of knowledge, preparation, and observation to guide the room without overt assertion, each gesture measured, each breath controlled, the rhythm of her presence commanding attention through quiet confidence. The room remained charged with unspoken awareness, the executives attuned to every detail of her movements, every subtle inflection in her voice, every micro-expression, the sunlight dancing across the surfaces, enhancing the sense of clarity and insight, and Andrew Whitman's reflective gaze now settled fully on her analysis. The weight of responsibility and comprehension finally acknowledged across the board as the room recalibrated itself around the quiet, precise authority Emily had established. Andrew Whitman sat back slowly, the leather of his chair creaking under the subtle shift, his fingers rubbing his temples as a deep, measured exhale left him, a moment of introspection settling over his broad shoulders. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows cast soft streaks across the polished oak table, highlighting the careful alignment of the documents Emily Carter had prepared, each line emphasized with precision, each highlight a testament to meticulous preparation. His eyes scanned the contract again, now not merely reading words but tracing implications, outcomes, and responsibilities that he had previously taken for granted, and a subtle tension wove through his posture as the magnitude of potential errors settled in. Emily remained poised, her hands lightly resting on the edge of the table, her gaze unwavering, noting the nearly imperceptible changes in expression around the room. The quick intake of breath from a senior partner, the slight narrowing of eyes from the legal counsel, the small lean forward of an executive who had once nodded confidently, now caught in reconsideration. The soft hum of the air conditioning underscored the tense stillness, each tick of the clock magnifying the weight of realization, while sunlight danced across glass and wood, creating subtle reflections that drew attention to the clarity and precision Emily had brought to the situation. Andrew's exhale lengthened, and he pressed a hand lightly against the contract, tracing the lines she had emphasized, the slight tension in his knuckles revealing the gravity of self-reflection, an internal dialogue forming quietly in his mind about decisions made in haste and assumptions unchallenged. Around him, the executives remained still, their micro-movements, a tilt of the head, a subtle shift of posture, a deliberate pause, speaking volumes about recognition, reconsideration, and the respect afforded to clear, deliberate insight. Emily's eyes swept the room, noting every small gesture, every nuance and expression, understanding that authority could be reshaped not by force or position, but by clarity, preparation, and quiet confidence. Andrew's lips pressed together briefly, then parted for a slow, thoughtful exhale, the soft sound filling the silent boardroom, signaling internal acknowledgement and a moment of humility as the implications of oversight settled fully in his awareness. Sunlight shifted again, highlighting the polished surfaces, the meticulously aligned documents, and the poised figure of Emily, emphasizing the contrast between her calm assurance and the reflective stance of Andrew Whitman, whose posture now carried both recognition and measured contemplation. The assistant near him shifted slightly, a soft scrape of paper marking acknowledgement of the room's recalibrated awareness, while the board members' subtle nods and attentive glances reinforced the collective understanding that insight, preparation, and measured observation could command focus and recalibrate assumptions even in a room accustomed to unquestioned authority. Andrew's gaze returned to Emily briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a recognition that her meticulous preparation, calm presence, and precise articulation had guided the room to a new equilibrium where reflection, understanding, and careful consideration took precedence over unchallenged confidence. Each movement, each micro-expression, each deliberate breath in the room became part of the rhythm, the pulse of awareness, the acknowledgement that careful, informed insight had shifted perceptions, compelled reflection, and established a quiet but undeniable influence in the balance of authority. Emily's presence remained composed, deliberate, and steady, allowing the room to absorb, internalize, and respect the clarity she had provided, the sunlight highlighting her calm focus and reinforcing the subtle but powerful impact of preparation, knowledge, and confidence as Andrew Whitman continued to reflect quietly on the ramifications of the moment, the recalibration of his understanding, and the unspoken recognition of the authority earned through clarity and diligence. Andrew Whitman leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of comprehension settle fully into his shoulders, his eyes lingering on the contract one last time as the room remained suspended in a state of attentive stillness, the polished surfaces and tall windows casting shifting reflections that highlighted both the clarity of Emily Carter's preparation and the subtle tension of anticipation. Emily's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers splayed deliberately, her posture firm yet unassuming, and she allowed the executives a moment to process fully the precision and insight she had provided, knowing that careful patience often carried more influence than urgency or force. The senior partners exchanged small, wordless glances, subtle nods, and micro-expressions of acknowledgement, each one quietly affirming that the recalibration of understanding had occurred, that Emily's meticulous analysis had guided the room to a new awareness, and that authority was not merely a matter of title, but of clarity, knowledge, and preparedness. Andrew's fingers traced the highlighted lines again, a slow and thoughtful movement. The faint creases of concentration deepening across his forehead as he absorbed the implications of each clause, recognizing not only the potential consequences, but the rare value of insight delivered with confidence and precision. Around the room, the soft hum of the air conditioning punctuated the silence, each breath and subtle movement amplified by the stillness, and the sunlight, moving across the floor, danced in scattered patterns over polished wood and glass, drawing attention to Emily's poised figure and the documents that had commanded the room's attention. Andrew's eyes lifted to meet hers briefly, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, signaling recognition, respect, and the dawning awareness that preparedness and insight had earned a place in the room equal to, if not surpassing, the authority of long-established position. Emily's gaze moved methodically from executive to executive, noting the subtle reactions, a slight lean forward, a soft intake of breath, a micro-adjustment of posture, all reflecting the room's collective understanding that her careful articulation had shifted perception, highlighted overlooked details, and guided reflection without overt assertion. The light continued to filter through the windows, illuminating the edges of the documents, the carefully highlighted clauses, and the calm, deliberate presence of Emily, emphasizing the interplay of preparation, clarity, and influence in a space accustomed to hierarchical authority. Andrew exhaled slowly, letting his hand relax from the edge of the contract, his posture softening into reflective contemplation, the quiet room echoing with the subtle weight of reconsideration and a muted recognition of the balance of power that had shifted through insight alone. The assistant nearest him adjusted a stack of folders lightly, the faint scrape echoing in the otherwise silent room, signaling the tacit acknowledgement that the insight and precision Emily had provided demanded attention and recalibrated focus, while the other executives mirrored subtle, deliberate responses, a quiet chorus of recognition forming in the space. Emily's presence remained calm, controlled, and deliberate, her poise and measured movements allowing the authority of knowledge to guide the room, the sunlight highlighting the composed focus of her figure, the careful alignment of highlighted clauses, and the attentive expressions of those around her. Each breath, each slight gesture, each fleeting micro-expression reinforced the quiet dominance of preparation and clarity over assumption and unchallenged confidence, leaving Andrew Whitman and the board members in a moment of reflection, acknowledgement, and subtle recalibration, the room attuned fully to the meticulous influence of Emily Carter and the weight of insight she had brought to the table, creating a suspended moment of understanding that would linger well beyond the immediate review of the contract. Emily Carter finally released her hands from the edge of the polished table, stepping back slightly, her posture still straight, her presence calm, yet commanding, and the room seemed to breathe with her as the executives absorbed the full significance of her insights. Andrew Whitman sat in his leather chair, hands loosely clasped in front of him, eyes resting on the contract as a slow, deliberate exhale passed through him, the quiet acknowledgement of error and oversight settling into his expression without the need for words. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, scattering across the polished oak, reflecting off glass surfaces and laptops, casting patterns of warmth and light that mirrored the subtle shift in energy, the recalibration of attention, and the silent recognition of clarity and preparedness over mere authority. Around the room, micro-expressions, the subtle narrowing of eyes, the gentle lift of eyebrows, the measured nods of acknowledgement, communicated what words could not, the collective respect and reconsideration forming silently in the space between Emily's steady gaze and the attentive faces of the executives. The assistant nearest Andrew adjusted a folder quietly, the soft scrape of paper blending with the hum of the air conditioning, a signal of recognition and the room's new equilibrium, while the senior partners leaned slightly forward, careful not to disturb the fragile tension, yet fully attuned to the demonstration of insight and careful analysis that had redirected the room. Andrew's eyes returned once more to Emily, a silent acknowledgement passing in a glance, a subtle gesture that spoke of gratitude, respect, and recognition that authority and experience could be enhanced by courage, clarity, and precise preparation. The polished surfaces reflected the sunlight and the subtle movements, emphasizing the contrast between the calm, deliberate presence of Emily and the measured, reflective stance of Andrew, the shifting light highlighting the textures of documents, the lines she had emphasized, and the poised focus that had held the room's attention. Every subtle gesture, every micro-expression, every careful breath contributed to a rhythm of reflection, a cadence of acknowledgement that was both silent and profound, reinforcing the quiet authority of insight over title, clarity over assumption. Emily's gaze swept across the room one last time, noting each small change, each imperceptible reaction, the soft intake of breath, the careful lean of a shoulder, the subtle narrowing of eyes, all acknowledging the shift in dynamics, the recalibration of perception, and the recognition of the meticulous preparation she had brought to the table. The sunlight flickered as a cloud passed, softening the reflections across the polished table and glass, accentuating the quiet power of her presence, the deliberate precision of her movements, and the calm assurance with which she had guided the room through understanding, clarity, and recognition. Andrew exhaled again, slow and measured, a gentle sign of reflection and consideration, the tension in his shoulders softening as the room fully absorbed the lessons of the moment, the delicate balance of attention and authority recalibrated by insight and preparation. Around them, the room remained quietly attentive, the executives holding small gestures, soft nods, and subtle glances that reflected respect and acknowledgement. A new equilibrium formed not through assertion of power, but through the calm, deliberate authority of Emily's insight and understanding. The sunlight shifted once more across the polished surfaces, illuminating her composed figure, the highlighted lines of the contract, and the thoughtful expressions of the executives, emphasizing the enduring impact of preparation, clarity, and courage, leaving Andrew Whitman, Emily Carter, and the entire room suspended in a moment of reflection, understanding, and quiet recognition. A moment that promised to resonate beyond the immediate review, a reminder that true authority is measured not by position alone, but by knowledge, clarity, and the courage to speak with precision and confidence.